Listen, my children, and you shall hear of a lovely feminine, Paul Revere, who rode an equally famous ride through a different part of the countryside, where Sybil Ludington's name recalls a ride as daring as that of Paul's. In April 1777, a smoky glow in the eastern heaven, a fiery herald of war and slaughter, came to the eyes of the colonel's daughter. "Danbury's burning," she cried aloud. The colonel answered, "'Tis but a cloud reflecting the campfire's red, so hush you, Sybil, and go to bed. I hear the sound of the cannon drumming. 'Tis only the wind in the treetops humming, so go to bed as a young lass ought, and give the matter no further thought." Young Sybil sighed as she turned to go. "Still Danbury's burning, that I know." Sound of a horseman riding hard, clatter of hoofs in the manor yard, feet on the steps and a knock resounding, as a fist struck wood with a mighty pounding. The doors flung open, a voice is heard. "Danbury's burning, I rode with word. Fully half of the town's gone, and the British are coming on. Send a messenger, get our men." His message finished, the horseman then staggered wearily to a chair and fell exhausted in slumber there. The colonel muttered, "And who, my friend, is the messenger I can send? Your strength is spent, and you cannot ride, and then you know not the countryside. I cannot go, for my duty's clear. When my men come in, they must find me here. There's devil a man on the place tonight to warn my troopers to come and fight." "Then who is my messenger to be?" said Sybil Ludington. "You have me." "You," said the colonel, and grimly smiles. "You, my daughter, you're just a child." "Child," cried Sybil, "why, I'm 16. My mind's alert and my senses keen. I know where the trail and the roadways are, and I can gallop as fast and far as any masculine rider can. You want a messenger? I'm your man." The colonel's heart was aglow with pride, spoke like a soldier. "Ride, girl, ride. Ride like the devil, ride like sin. Summon my slumbering troopers in. I know when duty is to be done that I can depend on a Ludington." So over the trails to the towns and farms, Sybil delivered the call to arms, riding swiftly without a stop except to rap with a riding crop on the soldier's door with a sharp tattoo and a high-pitched feminine halloo. Up there, soldier, you're needed, come. The British are marching." And then the drum of her horse's feet as she rode apace to bring more men to the meeting place. Sybil grew weary and faint and drowsing. Her limbs were aching, but still she rode until she finished her task of rousing each sleeping soldier from his abode, showing her father by work well done that he could depend on a Ludington. Dawn in the skies with its tint of pearl, and the lass who rode in a soldier's stead turned home, only a tired girl, thinking of breakfast and then to bed, with never a dream that her ride would be a glorious legend of history, nor that posterity's hand would mark each trail she rode through the inky dark, each path to figure in song and story as a splendid, glamorous path to glory, to prove, as long as the ages run, that you can depend on a Ludington. Such is the legend of Sybil's ride to summon the men from the countryside, a true tale making her title clear as a lovely feminine Paul Revere.
That, my friends, is Sybil Ludington's Ride by Burton Braley. What a great what a great story. We last time we talked about one of my heroes, Hugh Mercer, and I love this story because in some ways it's kind of the opposite, but it shows that same amount of courage, that same like clarity of thought and vision and purpose, and man, it's a powerful story, and I'm excited to share it.
Yeah, I think it's something that people don't talk about enough. We're doing it today because today is the anniversary of her birth. Um, Sybil Ludington, Danbury, Connecticut. Her father was the colonel of the local militia in Connecticut there. And yeah, 16 years old. and hardly.
And we talked about last time with Mercer how $10 is like a million. 16 in that time is like, I don't know what, 28, 32.
I mean, I don't know. It's like, sounds like you're figuring dog years or something, but I don't. I mean, she
the
was
maturity of
yeah. I mean, I don't know the maturity, how we could measure, but she certainly would be someone who'd already been considered a woman. She would
Right.
be someone that could be married, at that age, and not. I mean, I know it's popular. People think everybody with 12 was married. That's not
No.
true. That isn't true at all. But she
But
was certainly.
she would have been capable of handling a household,
Oh,
handling
no question.
any kind of chores on the farm that needed to be done.
Not even a question.
Yeah.
None of that would have been questioned. She certainly would have been capable of things that 16-year-olds today would be, leveled at even the thought of having to do. The thought of running a household is, I'm only, today you have 26-year-olds that balk at the thought of being married or being in charge of a house and that sort of thing. And I mean, the thing that I get out of her story, and again, it's Sybil Ludington, is just that such a desire existed that there was a 16-year-old girl willing to step into the breach when there was nothing else that could have been done. And at the end of the day, her story is so inspiring because not only was she a 16-year-old girl willing to do what rightfully was a man's job, and she acknowledged that herself, but the fact that she was unsuccessful. Danbury, her hometown was burned. Danbury, Connecticut was burned by the British. The militia didn't arrive in time. I mean, they arrived in time to have skirmishes after the British had burned the town.
Right.
So it's one of those things. Would she consider herself a failure? Today, I think people would define that as failure. I think she would have recognized, and I hope wherever she is, she's able to know that, people are talking about her today on the anniversary of her birth. I think that she did all she could have done, and thus is the measure of your sacrifice, right? It's the widow's mite sort of thing. A widow's mite doesn't build temples, right? But a widow's mite fulfills the obligation of sacrifice to the fullest measure possible for that widow.
Right.
And so she was, unlike Paul Revere. Paul Revere was successful. Sybil wasn't, but she, unlike most of us, gave the fullest measure that she was able and did what she could do.
She did her duty, more beyond her duty, really. She did what had to be done. And at the same time, while it's true that Danbury was burned, it did end up, because of the skirmishes that you mentioned, my understanding, it did cost the British a bit. And it was a costly victory for the British.
Yeah, it was. They did lose some men, but I wanted to read the account. Well, actually, I wanted to say something. It's, as you read this, and I'd been teaching about this, and it actually came up, I think, because there was I used to teach on this day, do this thing on this day in history, and her birthday came up in the list, and I was like, oh, we should talk about her because she's a story that doesn't get told a lot, like Hugh Mercer. But she lived in Dutchess County, which my family lived there at the time, obviously part of my family, and they were in the militia regiment that her father commanded, which is crazy to think that there might have been a daughter of one of my ancestors that knew her, right? That was like her same age or something like that. And again, please do that with yourself. Please find out your family's intersections with history. It makes it all more alive to you. And it points out that you too have those noble ancestors that established a name, that had a good character, and that were patriots or whatever. Just that you have those people in your family worthy of your study and worthy of your attention. You should know these stories, you know. And so when I read Dutchess County Militia, and I was like, wait a minute, that's my family was in that militia in the 1770s. So I'm not related to Sybil Ludington, but someone that was my whatever eighth great grandma might have been her little pal, you know?
Right.
And that's cool
That's
to think.
very cool.
But I wanted to read to you the story of that attack on Danbury because there's a lot to learn from it.
Okay.
So this is a story just.
And by the way, I'm
Yeah.
so glad you have a good account of it. I was reading some things too, but I like to, tell you my sources. My sources were from Comedy Central's Drunk History. That was an excellent, excellent recounting of the Sybil Ludington story. And also Liberty Kids. I think it's episode 120 or 121. I think it was on Sybil, and it was very good.
Yeah.
And the thing I got most, I have to say, one of her great traits that I got from that particular source was that her hatred for the press, and that was way more important for somebody to be fighting the war than talking about the war. And I appreciated that about her.
Yeah, I do remember that.
She liked men of action.
Yeah, that I remember that episode where because like the Liberty Press kids or the Liberty kids are like, we're writing the newspaper or whatever, and she's like, you should be fighting, not writing, but riding.
Right.
So yeah, there's a lot to learn about the story of the battle. So April 25th, 1777. A 2,000-man British force commanded by General Tryon landed at Fairfield, Connecticut, near the mouth of the Sagatuck River, arriving with 20 transports and 6 warships. Now, you must remember at this time, we didn't have one warship.
Right.
We had 0 warships. Here's just one little regiment of the British military with 6 warships and 20 transport ships. That would have been more than the civilian population of Danbury.
Right.
Just there to take over. So they moved 8 miles inland and camped at Weston. The next day, the force moved north into Danbury, doing no damage to private property along the way. In Danbury, however, they began a search for stores for the Continental Army supplies, leaving chalk. Now, here we go. See if this sounds familiar. Leaving chalk marks on the property of British loyalists and informers. Properties without chalk marks were to be destroyed. By 4 p.m., several Continental Army storehouses and 3 private homes were in flames. For security reasons, the Continental Army had recently transferred its supplies from Peekskill to Danbury, where they thought they would be safe, and they were consequently poorly guarded. The stores included foodstuffs and several hundred cases of wine and rum, hospital cots, tents, along with clothing, shoes, and cooking utensils. Medicine and medical supplies were stored in New Milford and were not affected by this raid. The British soldiers found the rum and decided to consume it rather than destroy it, but they caused them to get drunk and start more fires, burning down more property of anyone who wasn't literally marked as a loyalist or an informer. The discipline broke down and messengers were dispatched in all directions to announce that the British had arrived and that they were burning down the property of patriots. So Colonel Ludington had about 400 men in the militia. And so the messenger that's mentioned in the poem that I read, he arrived about 9 p.m. But of course, as the state of militia and the state of the country being agricultural, they were spread out. So someone had, and it's 9 p.m. We're talking, it's bedtime.
Yeah.
So we had to have someone who could ride through the forest. I don't know if you've ever been to Connecticut. It's very foresty and very hilly.
Yeah.
Connecticut, I love the geography. I have family that lives in Connecticut and love visiting there for many reasons, historical and it's beautiful country. But riding through the forest of Connecticut and just the rolling hills at pitch black would not be something that some Continental Army soldier could do.
Right.
He wouldn't know the area. And so Colonel Ludington is like, well, I can't go because then they're going to be, if they hear about it somewhere else, they're going to come to me as the central place to meet. So I have to send somebody, and as the poem indicates, his daughter. And there are sources on both sides. Some say his daughter volunteered. Some say that he actually asked her to do it and drew up the route that she would ride. Either way, guess what? She did it.
She did it.
And okay, lessons to be learned. Number one, they were going after ammunition. Guys, a gun without a bullet is a club. So don't get it twisted and think, oh, if they come after our, if they come after our guns, I'll put up resistance. Lexington and Concord were the same way. Lexington were ammunition. If they restrict the ammunition, I don't care what kind of weapon you have, right? If they cut off your fuel, I don't care what kind of automobile you have, what kind of vehicle you drive. So we need to learn that from our history, not only from Danbury, but from Lexington. Be very aware of the government's attempts to assert control over ammunition. Because I know I got in a whole lot of trouble several years ago when I reported that the last privately owned lead smelter was shut down by the EPA for several violations. And then miraculously, they were allowed to reopen under the command of the Army, the
Right.
U.S. Army. So now we have no private ammunition lead smelters in the United States, none at all. So anybody that sells ammunition, lead ammunition, has a contract with the Department of Defense to allow them to use the lead. That can be choked off and can completely be cut off. The supply of lead of that sort, lead that's used for ammunition, could be cut off by the government today. So when people talk about, stockpiling ammunition, there's wisdom in that. Learning how to reload.
Mm-hmm.
That's if you want to do something that's very valuable for the cause and you feel like, you're not someone who's a good writer or a good speaker or necessarily a good fighter, or you don't fancy shooting guns or anything like that, get into reloading. It's a pretty inexpensive hobby, and that will come in handy one of these days when we don't have to rely on the government granting us access to lead, because we have people that have taken their time to reload, to make lead out of spent cartridges, to make ammunition out of spent cartridges. And that'll be a good thing to have, people that have stockpiles of
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And the marking of the houses.
Right.
I mean, just having watched one of the World War II documentaries about how they would mark, or early on mark, the Jewish businesses, not so as to run them out of town, but to encourage the Germans to say, do I want to do business with Germans or Jews? Well, the Jews were German, which made no sense. But
Right.
the point is this idea of marking loyalists,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that we have that today. We have this, you can go on YouTube and go to my YouTube channel and not see videos because YouTube said that they were violated their standards.
Right.
Right.
Or on several videos you'll find little clarifications by YouTube. Hey, you need to watch out for this, or here's some something to debunk what
Right.
what was said. That's not something that you put or that the creator put. That's
Right.
something that YouTube probably at the behest of higher orders put on their behalf.
Right. And just the notion of being, approved,
Right.
right? Of being signal of who, and not only, do you notice it's not only loyalists, but informers. There's that lesson, the lesson of, well, why would someone turn in their neighbor? Because the neighbor got their house burned down, the informer didn't.
Right.
So it's not just being a loyalist, right? It's being an informer. You don't have to be an avowed loyalist, thus incurring the displeasure of your neighbors. You can pretend to be a patriot.
And if you're a good enough loyalist, you may be able to participate in some of those spoils that we've talked about before in previous episodes.
Yeah, and so what's the profit of an informer? Well, in this case, not having your house burned down. But I mean, if you want to get a bit conspiratorial with it, I mean, there is the Hawaii
Right.
with the roofs being colored.
Yeah.
I mean, it isn't like it hasn't been done. If you're someone who's spreading wildfire and which places to protect because the roofs of certain houses are blue,
That's
again, that's a way that you can use it. And this is very simple. Just mark it with chalk.
right.
Make it something that's almost insignificant.
Right.
Just make
Inconspicuous.
just something very inconspicuous, a chalk mark, or anything. It could be, and there's any number of things we're talking. If you think about the analogy of these British marking the homes of the loyalists and the informers, think of the concept of the social credit system.
Mm-hmm.
You go to use your debit card and it's insufficient funds. And when you ask, why, your bank reports, well, you had your funds frozen by the IRS because Homeland Security said you made insurrectionist videos or you posted memes. I mean, there have been people who have been prosecuted. Don't get this twisted. Memes have gotten people put in jail.
That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, there will come a day very soon when whether your house has been marked with chalk will be very obvious because you'll have access to the digital currency or not. And the way you retain access is, are
Right.
you a loyalist?
Do you
or
wear
are
your
you
mask?
Are you an informer? Right. Anything like that. Did you put up something criticizing the government? I mean, you realize Thomas Jefferson's own congressman was arrested because he criticized in a campaign brochure John Adams.
Right.
We have a history of it from the very beginning.
Yeah.
Of when someone gets power, wanting to make sure no one can challenge that power through the press or even vocally. So you could see how in 2028, you have a system where you have a 2-week freeze on your accounts while we investigate this video that you posted to YouTube or this comment that you made on Twitter.
Or maybe you were in the wrong place that you weren't supposed to be. And now, Bank of America says, oh, we're just going to let the FBI know
we have
all of your transactions for the last 2 weeks.
Right. We have to turn in, if you look, I mean, the banks are required
right.
by law to report certain things even today.
Yep.
So imagine when we get, you get, the bank I use reporting to Homeland Security that I've made large purchases at, a gun store. Then what's going to happen? I'm going to have my accounts frozen, right? While they investigate if I'm stockpiling weapons because that's illegal, right? Illegal.
And again, this is not like theory.
It's not dystopian. It's reality.
Right.
This is done today.
Today. Like there's a reason why, and I forget the guy's name, but there's a reason why I think he was in Pennsylvania. ATF just comes in and shoots a guy in cold blood, because he had the gall to sell a weapon off the books.
Well, imagine that you have, I mean, I had a story that I wrote several years ago of the Homeland Security making contracts with local police who made contracts with Ring cameras to have the footage. The police hired a contractor to install a Ring camera on your home if you would agree to give them access to the footage right? So you can imagine your Ring camera catches a picture of Joey bringing into his home what looks like a lot of weapons,
Right.
and then your neighbor, right, wanting to get the chalk mark on his door, calls the police, who come search your house, and the warrant is all based on footage. This isn't pretend,
No,
guys.
it,
This has really already happened and is happening and will continue to happen. And now with Biden saying we're going to ramp up in advance of the election, we're going to ramp up federal red flag laws, giant quotes around laws, right? We're going to ramp that up. This isn't dystopian. This is today.
and this is I think this takes us maybe to a larger point of the fear that our founders had of standing armies, because trust me, like the police, they're deputized by the feds. They're you're wow, I got a thumbs up.
Oh, can I get one? Nope, I don't get one.
Yeah.
They don't.
Wait, can we get some balloons, maybe? Um, but the they're all in cohorts with one another, and so even though they may not get a check from the DoD,
But they do.
but they do actually.
No, I mean it's not. Even though they might, they either get money in grant money, or they get
Yeah.
what they call materiel. Vehicles and weapons and uniforms and equipment.
So this fear that has become actualized. A legitimate fear of having a standing army, and one of the things that I was talking to you about a little bit earlier about the necessity or the need, the virtue of having a Minuteman slash militia system, um, a system where we are in it for our neighbors. We're here to protect our neighbors, not just from criminals, or let me say it, from the criminals that are both official and non-official criminals.
Yeah, the criminals that don't get persecuted or prosecuted
Right.
in the government. Yeah, and militia is such. I mean, that's the thing. I remember writing an article not too long ago, about a year ago, about how conservatives really do hate the Second Amendment because they love the right to keep and bear arms, but they hate the part about how a militia is necessary
Mm-hmm.
for the security of a free state. Nobody, that's, even conservatives don't like saying that part. They love the first part, shall not be infringed, everybody in my cold dead hands and all that. But the militia part, no, they sleep on that because that gets you in trouble.
See,
If you say I have the right to keep and bear arms, you can still get the chalk mark.
right.
You say we should have a militia, they're scrubbing that chalk mark off
Right
at your
on.
house. I mean, do you see burning down houses?
Yeah.
Right? This isn't pretend. We're learning this, we're applying this lesson that we learn. I mean, that's the ultimate. It's like Livy said, right? History is the best medicine for a sick mind. If you can't understand what's happening in your own time, read history and see how it's happening to us, right? And which reminds me of how much I hate the phrase history repeats itself, because that's so inane. It's so inane. History is just a written record of the acts of human beings. So if you want to say people keep making the same stupid mistakes, I will ratify that. But if the history repeats itself sounds like almost unavoidable. It gives us some sort of passive role in all of this, and
Right.
it isn't passive. If history repeats itself, it's because we're repeating the mistakes of our fathers.
And sometimes it takes a great man with a spark of the spirit to stand up against that revolving history, to say, "Look, no, we're not going to do this again." A colonel in Dutchess County who's going to summon men out of bed in the middle of the night, to
The
fight
colonel's daughter.
yeah, through his daughter, to to stand up to a professional regular army. And why are they you know eh, we use terms like liberty and we use terms like freedom, but what did that really mean to these farmers?
Well, why was the army there?
Right.
What were the
What
why
was
were
the
they
army
there?
doing there?
Why were they seizing ammunition?
Yeah, that's
Was there some sort of, I mean, yeah, they passed disarmament regulations. The king and parliament and local British government officials would pass disarmament regulations, but that violates, I mean, it's not like the British didn't have a right to keep and bear arms. That right to armed self-defense was mentioned by Blackstone, by Littleton, by Cook, Edward Cook. That right had been preserved inviolate for centuries. Every man, you talk about Tacitus and the Anglo-Saxons and sleeping on their swords.
right.
I mean, this is something that is ancient. It isn't something that, the Americans invented. Oh, we have a right to armed resistance to tyranny.
Right, and that's the point. It's the British, and we can't be clear. I hope not to be clear, or I hope to be as clear as I care to be on this point, which is the British were the aggressors in every case, in every stand. And why? Because they were there. They were there aggressing on the rights of the people. Period. End of story.
I mean, that's the whole thing of the Declaration of Independence. Why has he sent swarms of officers
Yeah.
to consume our property? Why are they to harass our people and consume our property? What we have that. It's just that, and read to you from 46 Federalist 46 in a minute, but the idea is James Madison in 46 says, I would hope that if the federal government were to become tyrannical, we would resist an American tyrant with the same ferocity that we resisted a British one. And he mentions the militia in that context. But so just so you can see here, the awesome new version of the edition of the Declaration and Constitution by the John Birch Society.
These United States.
Of the Constitution for the United States, not of the United States. And get that at shopjbs.org. Get those new copies for yourself. And so we have the Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. In other words, if you want to keep yourself free, then you must have a militia. Now, that does not say that you only are allowed to own arms if you're in the militia, but it's saying that the militia is necessary, not advisable, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right to keep and bear arms cannot be infringed. And so we have this history of militia, and here we have Colonel Ludington, with his 400 men, right? And why couldn't that, even if the rider wasn't tired, the Continental soldier wouldn't be able to ride through the forest and alert Colonel Ludington's men because he wouldn't know where they lived.
Right.
And today in our standing army, my father was in the army 25 years, and you never know. You never know who's going to be standing next to you. You never know the courage of that person, the virtue of that person, the valor of that person, the principles, the values. You never know if that person next to you will use you as a human shield. You never know if that person is an idiot who's going to stand up and decide to become informer all of a sudden to get the chalk mark and to save himself. You don't know that in an army like the United States Standing Army. You don't know that. You have no idea. He is a stranger to you. His principles, his courage are strange to you. You have no idea. They are unknown. And so the militia is not that way, because the militia, these are men that you're related to, that you grow up around. You know who they are. You know who you can trust. You know who the courageous ones are. You know their values. You know everything about them. And I wanted to read.
And by the way, is by nature peaceful and defensive.
Well, it's only defensive, right? That's the whole thing, right?
Right.
A militia would make no sense to go on the offensive.
Which is funny that it would be like, why would a U.S. government be so afraid or want to put down militias today? Well, because they're defensive by nature.
Right, because we'll get...
And they know what we'll be defending against.
Right, in Federalist 46, Madison says, one of the steps a tyrant would take would be to get rid of the militias.
Yeah.
You know, he's like, if something ever goes crazy and the federal government becomes tyrannical, one of the first things they'll do is abolish state militias. Well, there aren't any state militias, right? The 1990 U.S. versus Perfect gave the President of the United States command over that, right? So I wanted to read this to you. This is a letter written by Thomas Gordon. Yep, that Thomas Gordon. Thomas Gordon of Cato's Letters fame. I'm trying to get the date on this letter. I should have done that. It's in his book. This is the 1721. So this is in his 3 political letters to a noble lord concerning liberty and the Constitution. Now, that's the British Constitution, not the American, because this is Thomas Gordon writing in 1721. But he's writing about the benefit of having militia, because before his time, the Charles II had established a standing army. Charles I, excuse me, had established a standing army, and the militias were sort of abolished, right, in England, the need for them. And he was saying, look, we need to make sure and maintain the militias. And he's going to explain why. And I think, guys, I know I'm talking so fast. Just listen to this. Put aside the bias against militia, you know, put aside the stigma that's associated with that word, and think about what he says, and think about Sybil Ludington, think about defending this town and every town, and think about how this might be the only way that the security of whatever state you live in can be maintained. As the founding father said, necessity. A well-regulated militia is necessary to the security of a free state. And so this is Thomas Gordon writing in 1721. He says, when the Latins had revolted from their obedience to the Romans, each man, says Livy, chose his relation or his neighbor for his companion in the war. So do you understand? The Latins, that was a certain part of Italy. They were fighting against the upstart Romans, and the Romans had an army these were professional army, and the Latins were, well, we're going to fight in small groups of family and friends. So each man chose his relation or his neighbor for his companion in the war. They made a solemn oath to be true to each other. Do you know who you swear to in the United States Army?
I'm guessing the president.
The president and the Constitution, right?
Okay.
So, you don't swear a solemn oath to be true to each other. People would do it because they want to get that big check they get for signing up in the Army, and they want to have a job. If they can't do anything, I can join the Army. Trust me, don't come at me either. I spent 25 years as the child of a soldier. I know what's going on, right? I have the receipts. Most of these people would not be someone that you would expect to be true to a solemn oath to be true to each other. And they resolved to conquer or die together. This confederacy, consisting all of relations or friends whose virtue, valor, and abilities were known to each other, raised and animated their courage and inspired them with such sentiments as like to have proved fatal to the Roman power. Confidence arising from the knowledge of your associate's abilities, from his virtue, courage, and other necessary qualities, must surmount the greatest difficulties and gain every advantage. Such a combination makes the interest of one the interest of all. Their motives and their ends are all the same. Their counsels are regularly directed. See, the regulation, a well-regulated, their counsels are regularly directed, and their conduct from thence is so uniform, so well-regulated. Their conduct is so uniform that no ambition or confederacy can disturb them. Now that's 1721, Thomas Gordon, reading from Livy and learning. we learn from Sybil Ludington
Yeah.
story, the value of the militia. Then you learn Thomas Gordon learning from Livy, the history of Rome, how they were able to have success, right? What the militia was, because in his own time, they were forgetting what it was, 1721. You know, and in our time, it has a stigma. If you're in a militia, you're thought to be some sort of, you know, extreme white right-wing domestic terrorist, honestly.
Yeah.
And you notice he says in there the uniform conduct, the uniform well-regulated councils. Those words meant something to our fathers. They knew these things. They knew the value of knowing the guy next to you, of conquering or dying together, right? As the Spartans would say, right?
Yep.
Come home with your shield or on it. You know, you succeed or die trying, but don't go like the Chaucians, right? Don't be like the Chaucians. Don't go looking for war. But when it comes to you, you are ready to take on whoever comes to disturb your peace and to defend your home. And the guy next to you is defending his home, right? And you know that you're defending something that matters to you because it's literally the ground you were raised on.
Yeah.
It's your soil.
And you there's no envy because it's your soil, it's your land. There's no reason to gather together and go after somebody else's. You know,
Right. What because you don't really care.
you don't care.
If you know, it's just like in Germania. Tacit is saying these tribes of Germany. It wasn't about conquering. It was just about leave us alone, so we can raise our family and our food in peace.
And the benefits, like as I'm studying the Revolutionary War, you know, doing this little musical I'm working on, but as a plug, you know,
Yeah, go see on Broadway Mercer.
Right. It'll be out someday.
Go see Mercer on Broadway.
Go see Mercer on Broadway. That's gonna be the hashtag Mercer on Broadway.
Oh, that's a good one.
See?
There
we go.
There you go.
But it's so fascinating to me. First of all, the wins, and they were wins at Lexington and Concord, were strictly militia. I mean, those were just men who were fighting for their families, fighting for their liberty, and wanted the British out. Another example that I love because it pinpoints the proper relationship between army and militia and leadership and government and all of these things is the idea that Washington himself, the great George Washington, could not lord over the militias. He had to negotiate with them and talk to them about how they were, you know, make sure that in order he wanted to he had to make them cohesive together, but he couldn't do it in a
he couldn't force them because he had no command.
He had no command over them. That's right. And so and my friends, that is the proper relationship.
Yeah, he had, and he wouldn't have wanted.
Right.
He wouldn't have negotiated with them if he had any notion that he had authority over them.
Right.
He wasn't that kind of, you know, obsequious little, you know, feminine man. He would have asserted his authority if he had it. He didn't have it. Therefore, he had to negotiate with them to have them grant to him any sort of authority over their units. Right? That, and again, so defensive, it's so peaceful, and it's so powerful because, like Thomas Gordon said, you know this guy. Right. You're not going in search of some monster to destroy abroad. You're here. I don't want you burning my house down because it doesn't have a chalk mark.
Exactly.
Simple as that.
Exactly.
It's nothing else. These guys are marching into, because don't think it won't happen, man. Do not think it won't happen. And don't think it'll be blue helmeted UN. I get so tired of those people. It ain't going to be blue helmeted UN soldiers. And it probably isn't going to be United States Army. It's going to be your local police who are now
deputized,
who are now a branch of the armed forces because of their contractual relationship with Homeland Security and the Pentagon. Don't get it twisted. That's who's going to come for your weapons. That's who will come to what would you say, to enforce the law,
Right.
right? So James Madison in Federalist 46, he's arguing against this idea that someday, because, the anti-federalists were practically prophets, and they're like, yeah, this government we're creating, we're not going to stay virtuous long enough to maintain this kind of government. And it will become tyrannical, and it will consume our liberty and obliterate state governments, and it will consolidate everything into the center, and we will be nothing more than slaves to some domestic tyrant. And James Madison says, now listen to this. He says, let a regular army, now this is Federalist 46 for those of you scoring at home, let a regular army fully equal to the resources of the country be formed, and let it be entirely at the devotion of the federal government, which is what we have now.
Right.
We have a regular army entirely under the command of the federal government. So he says, suppose that, let it be. Suppose that happens. Still, it would not be going too far to say that the state governments with the people on their side would be able to repel the danger. The highest number to which, according to the best computation, a standing army can be carried in any country does not exceed 1/100th part of the whole number of souls, or 1/25th part of the number able to bear arms. This proportion would not yield in the United States an army of more than 25 or 30,000 men, and to these would be opposed a militia amounting to near 500,000 citizens with arms in their hands, officered by men chosen from among themselves, fighting for their common liberty, and united and conducted by governments possessing their affections and confidence. That it may well be doubted whether a militia thus circumstanced could ever be conquered by any number of regular troops.
Joe, that is so powerful. It is the solution. Any of you Republican right wingers out there that are A, maybe scared of China, B, scared of the southern border, what's happening there,
That have ever slagged somebody off for being in a militia,
right?
that called him, oh, a wannabe soldier.
Yep.
How about the soldiers are the wannabes?
And by the way, we are less secure with a regular army, less secure with
Try to get a
professional
militia to
soldiers.
go to defend the borders of Ukraine. Try to
Yeah.
get a militia to go unseat a dictator from some country thousands of miles from us that never could do us any harm. A militia doesn't do that.
No.
A militia defends their home, and as he says, no matter how powerful an army, it may well be doubted whether a militia thus circumstances could ever be conquered by any regular army.
Yep.
It's the answer. It is.
It is the answer. It's absolutely the answer. Because yeah. You know, and I thought specifically about the China fear, because China's big and they have lots of people, but you know what, they cannot summon the number of soldiers needed to acquire, to take over the United States.
Even if they could, it would be like my man trying to ride through the Connecticut forest
Right.
at night.
Exactly. As long as there's a well-regulated militia.
As long as
militias,
every house is a man and his sons bearing arms.
they wouldn't even try.
No, it would make no sense. It would make no sense.
And it would, you want crime to go down, have a well-regulated militia. You want, I don't know, you want more peace and less top-down government, have a well-regulated militia.
You want to claim you're a patriot and that you love the Constitution and that the right to keep and bear arms. You want all of that? Then enforce the Second Amendment, which begins with the necessity of a militia. You want to claim you revere the founding fathers and James Madison and George Washington. Well, he just told you that you shouldn't have a standing army. And even if the federal government grows to be in control of a regular army that's entirely at the devotion of the federal government, so what?
Mm-hmm.
They can't beat us because of our militia. Right? He doesn't say could, he says would. Because of the number able to bear arms, this proportion not could yield, this proportion would yield.
Right.
The militias could take on any tyrannical federal force, be it the United States Army or the federalized police.
No need for a draft.
Why? Well, you don't.
Right.
What, are you going to draft me to protect my house? Right? You're protecting your house, and then you're protecting your neighbors. You're swearing this oath to each other to be true to each other, this solemn vow. You don't wonder if the guy next to you is going to give up, surrender your position. You don't wonder if he understands what you're saying. You grew up with the guy.
Yep.
You're both protecting each other. You're making a solemn vow. You know these are your relations, your friends. You know their virtue, their value, their virtue, their valor, and their values. You know that. Trust me. My dad fought 3 tours of Vietnam and 1 of Desert Storm, and didn't know any of that about any of the people who fought next to him. They were strangers to him.
Let alone
And
those
they
that
were
commanding
fighting.
him.
They were fighting to defeat an enemy they didn't understand in a country that had nothing to do with them and could never threaten the United States. So imagine the power. You know, you see in the 60s, these kids coming home, these soldiers coming home, and they're like, I have no idea what I was doing over there. Militias know what they're doing all the damn time.
Right.
I know what I'm doing. I'm defending my neighborhood. I'm defending my family and my friend's family. I know him. I know how he lives his life. I know that I can count on him.
That's right.
No, James Madison said it. Okay, you wanna pin it on some radical, pin it on the radical father of the Constitution, who said that if the federal government gained control of a regular army, no matter what size, the militia in the United States would be able to overcome them. Would be able to. Guys, it may well be doubted whether militia thus circumstanced could ever be conquered by a regular army. It won't happen. Why? Because why? Because the next sentence, those who are best acquainted with the late successful resistance of this country against the British will be most inclined to deny the possibility of it. Besides the advantage of being armed, which the Americans possess over most people of every other country, the existence of subordinate governments to which the people are attached and by which the militia officers are appointed form a barrier against the enterprise of ambition more insurmountable than any simple government could form or admit of. That insurmountable barrier has been destroyed, not by the federal government, because who cares? It's been destroyed by us allowing them to stigmatize the existence of a well-regulated group of friends and family being well-regulated, right? Oh, I did get a thumbs up. Being well-regulated, defending their homes, right? That's what's happened to the militia. And I wanted to read just this other part of 46, if you don't mind. He talks about that should the federal government ever get tyrannical, he said, then the states would open up plans of resistance. One spirit would animate and conduct the whole. And the same combinations, in short, would result from now listen, he's saying we would end up doing what? We would have an apprehension of a federal yoke, the same as was produced by the dread of a foreign one. And unless, now listen, just calmly listen to this. And unless the projected innovations, so the federal innovations being federal violations of the Constitution, unless they were voluntarily renounced, the same appeal to a trial of force would be made in the domestic case as was made in the foreign one. I don't care where the tyrant was born. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
We do not accept an American yoke any easier than we accept a foreign one. And we've got to learn from this lesson from Sybil and her father and those 400 men, and the fact that the British went around. Look, if you're in the militia, you sure enough ain't going to get a mark on your door. You're not protected. But guess what? If I call and say my neighbor is meeting with a bunch of guys down the street in a park, and they seem to have looks like weapons, even if they're only wooden, and they're marching and they're doing things like that, you don't think the police are going to roll up to that?
Oh, yeah.
And guess what I get? I get that chalk mark, baby. My house ain't going to get burned down. Hey, my house ain't going to get burned down. I just informed on some domestic terrorists, Mike.
Man.
You know, the domestic terrorists that the Second Amendment says are necessary for the security of a free state.
Yeah. And that's how we divide ourselves up, man. That's how.
So where are the Sybil Ludingtons? Aren't you the father of one?
I am the father of one. Yes. And
Rachel, shout out to Rachel.
Rachel,
a Sybil Ludington for sure.
For sure.
Oh, that girl would. Oh, she'd hop on a horse.
She would.
She'd hop on a horse and ride. He would ride through, saying the feds are coming.
And if you decided not to open your door, she'd tear your door down.
Oh yeah. So she'd be out there, yeah, for sure.
She as the drunk history said, she'd say, "Get out here, you MFers." Maybe you're gonna be fighting.
I mean, we got a little thing we got to do. We got
to take care of business here.
We got some people burning our houses down,
right?
Stealing our ammunition, taking our food. Guys, do you see what it said? The food was stored there. That in case they were besieged by the British, they'd have food. So what did the British steal? Ammunition and the food supply. I mean, if you have ears to hear, I hope you hear.
Yeah.
Ask not for whom the bell tolls, because it tolls for thee, unless you do something about it. Right? And the day that comes that we get to walk around seeing those chalk marks because, you know, you're either a loyalist to the tyrant or an informer on his behalf, I ain't gonna go.
By the way, and I want to say this for the record. I see your chalk marks, loyalists.
Oh yeah,
I see.
We can all tell the chalk marks.
I see them. I know who you are.
We know who they are. We know who, not only the people making the chalk marks, but we see the chalk marks. All right, we see them. Don't be afraid of that. But I know several Sybil Ludingtons. I really do.
You do.
I know several Sybil Ludingtons that take my classes and would be, you know,
and we'll teach
them. And that's the thing.
Yeah.
Beware, because we're going to use math to our favor, because Sybil Ludington was the oldest of 12.
Yeah, she was.
I mean, we're going to use math to our favor.
And she married a revolutionary.
And while you people out there wondering what gender you are, right, and trying to figure out how men can breastfeed and nonsense like that, those of us over here without the chalk mark, our women are having 12 children, and every one of them being kept out of the eye of the tyrant and out of the indoctrination camps, every one of them being taught these stories by Madison and Thomas Gordon and Sybil Ludington. Right?
Choose your hero.
And so think about that. Not only was it the fact that you were a loyalist or an informer, but the British coming and burning down the houses and taking the food supply, man.
By the way,
you don't think they're doing that to you literally have, this is what blows my mind. What would we do to know if our food was good if we didn't have the FDA?
Right.
Are you kidding me? You know, every drug that's ever been recalled was approved first, right? By the FDA. Every drug that they say, yeah, this causes birth defects, every one of those was approved first, right? You think having the federal, just pause, just try to get through the fog that's been created in your mind. Do you think having the federal government in charge of the food, the safety of our food supply sounds wise to you. If you do, please get educated.
Yeah.
And go, and if you do think that, go wash the chalk mark off your house. You know what I'm talking about. Go take that box of masks that you still have left over for next time. Go out back, burn the damn things. Tonight, in honor of Sybil Ludington and the burning of Danbury, Connecticut, go burn all that stuff that would earn you a chalk mark. See if you can't feel the spirit of Sybil there cheering you on.
I mean, as you burn that stuff, it'll burn into your soul, man. It'll cleanse your heart.
You talk about, hey, the Pentecost, baby.
Yeah.
Pentecost. We need a patriotic Pentecost.
Yeah, a Liberty Pentecost would be good.
And, learn about this militia stuff. You saw, I just read it from, dude, this is the signet copy of I didn't make that up, man. Go read it for yourself, Federalist 46. I didn't make up what Madison just said. Go get a copy of 3 Political Letters to a Noble Lord by Thomas Gordon. I didn't make this up. We didn't make up someone had to, why couldn't the Continental Soldier do it? Tired or not, he would have done it had he been able to.
Right.
You're not going to be a soldier in the War for Independence. I'm just tired. He would have been like, tired. Get up before I put a.
Excuse me while I, wrap some more cloth around your foot.
I mean, seriously. So, I mean, we need, and this is what I think. Go to your neighbors, man, please, in honor, if nothing else, in honor of 16-year-old Sybil Ludington, what she meant to her hometown, and what you could mean to yours. Do the thing, man.
Yeah,
go to your neighbors.
That's exactly right.
Do the dang thing.
If you like us believe that there is
James Madison,
think that there's a crisis in the air right now, that we are living under tyranny, it is our duty to inform our neighbor.
It is necessary for the security of a free state that we men form ourselves into well-regulated, right? Councils. It's well-regulated. You go out. What's that mean? It means you become regular. It means you know each other. You know who's in command, right? You give each other commands based on whatever you decide. It's based on property or experience or age. It
wasn't explained that as we talked about in the last episode, it wasn't just some wild thing where they decided who the colonel of the militia was going to be through a vote.
No. And the well-regulated does not mean regulated by the government.
Right.
It means, like we read in Madison, the conduct circumstanced, right, is the word that Madison used. Conducted is the word that Gordon used, right? Meaning who's in charge, you've practiced things that you might need to do to protect your homes. You've learned how to use your weapons, all of those sorts of things, right? Not regulated by that. That would make no sense considering considering both of them just said this is in opposition to a standing army, and as Madison said, an army devoted or under the command of the federal government. That would make no sense. But do that. You don't be a big mouth about it, right? Just get it done. Just do the dang thing. Go to your neighbors, talk to them. If they think it's not something they want to be involved in, that's fine, right? We're not here to force anything, but start with your if you really are a Second Amendment guy, because I know some of you NRA people, you ain't Second Amendment guys. You're not. Because the NRA has supported so many regulations, government regulations, so many infringements on the right to keep and bear arms, which shall not be infringed unless it's reasonable. Right? The word reasonable doesn't appear in there, but the word militia does. Capiche? So, Sybil, we
Salute you,
We salute you. Sybil, salute.
Colonel Ludington.
Colonel
I
Ludington, thank
got
you for raising a young lady like that. Mike Levitt, thank you for raising a young lady like that. Who would do that?
Joe, thank you for teaching young ladies
lots of
and
young
young
ladies,
men.
and it strikes fear into them, Mike.
Yeah.
It strikes fear into them because we're going to use math to our advantage. They're not going to be taught in your schools.
Hey,
You're not going to be able to conscript them because you won't know they were born.
that's right.
You'll have no control over what they're taught. You won't be able to mess with their minds the way you messed with mine, the way you messed with Mike's, that we had to, be deprogrammed.
Mm-hmm.
You ain't going to be able to think about that, man. I know that scares you, and it ought to. And the fact that they're going to be good young men and old men like us who tonight will say, you know what? We're going to do the dang thing. We're going to do what James Madison, Thomas Gordon, Sybil Ludington, Colonel Ludington, we're going to do what the Second Amendment warns us to do, that we can't be free without a militia. That's what the Second Amendment starts by saying. And so just
And that's what this whole thing, this Return to Tradition podcast.
all of it. Yeah.
This is what
That's one of the traditions,
that's
right?
right.
The
And
militia.
and I would recommend, here's a little, self-promotion. Share this podcast. I think you'll be possibly happily surprised of people this will resonate with. I think there are people prepared for this information and these stories, these heroes, for it to resonate with them. I really believe that. And I believe it because I'm doing this. You know what I mean? Like I wouldn't do this if I did not think there are people out there that the Lord has prepared to return the tradition of liberty that we have so uh, thrown away with such hubris, such just complete disdain. So many of us that there are people that recognize that. So share this, and start warning your neighbor.
It becomes every man who has been warned to warn his neighbor. Shout it from the rooftops, right?
Yeah.
Use the power of the internet to spread this message. Show people if they don't agree, they don't agree. Big deal, right? But you never know people that might agree. People that sitting there and would claim to be pro Second Amendment forget that there's more to it than the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. They forget that the founding fathers said, without the militia, you cannot remain free.
Yeah.
I wanted to read this little quotation quickly from Tench Cox, who, if you're a militia guy, a Second Amendment guy, you want to read Tench Cox. My man has plenty to say. And I liked this little statement he made about the militia. Who are the militia? Are they not ourselves? Is it feared then that we shall turn our arms, each man against his own bosom? Congress has no power to disarm the militia. Their swords and every other terrible implement of a soldier is the birthright of an American. The unlimited power of the sword is not in the hands of either the federal or state government, but where I trust in God, it will ever remain in the hands of the people. May God make it so once again.
Amen.
Thanks, guys. Thank you, Sybil.